Hi, and welcome to Books in Action. My name is Larry Petraccaro, and I have here with me tonight Keisha Miller from the South Orange Public Library. She's the teen librarian, and Jenny Zabrija, who is at the Maplewood Memorial Library. But anyway, we're here tonight to talk about young adult fiction, and young adult fiction as it relates to and has been turned into movies. So we're going to turn this over to Keisha and Jenny, and they're going to give us a little bit of insight into what they think makes a good young adult novel, what they think makes a good film, and they may or may not be the same thing. So take it away.
Thank you, Larry. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Keisha.
So, just like Larry said, we're here today to talk about YA books or young adult books that have been adapted into film. And as we're going with our conversation, we do have some books that we can reference. So, what are your thoughts? YA books into film?
I would like to start off by saying that even though I used to work in teen services and now I am an adult librarian, I'll be the first to tell you that young adults are not the only audience for young adult books.
Right.
I read a statistic somewhere that I think 55% of the readership of young adult books is actually adults, like you and I. So I think there's a much wider audience for these books and also for the movies that get made out of them. There's many reasons for this. Like I like a good coming-of-age story. I think some people read it for escapism, but I think what we want to highlight here is that these books, the ones that get made into movies, are not just about escapism. They're becoming more about real-life concerns that our teens, the teens that we work with, have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Speaking about politics and social justice and other things that may hit a little closer to home, identity issues, things that may reflect their culture. And we'll get more into that.
We'll talk about how much it's changed, too, because I feel like when people think about teen movies that have been made from books, they're thinking of maybe slightly older fare, like Twilight, right? We remember Twilight, the original vampire movie that became like a mega super blockbuster. And that's not really what is being made into movies now. We're dealing with much more realistic topics nowadays.
I mean, there's also things like The Hunger Games and what we call blockbuster films.
Like dystopias, right?
The Divergent series. Let's see. But, you mentioned earlier about social justice and topics that hit a little closer to home. We both mentioned that. Recently, The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas.
Huge. This book is a huge deal in our world. You see all these stickers here, and that's because it won so many awards when it came out. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list, I think, for 2 years running now, at least. So this book sort of took the young adult world by storm, but also the world at large. I get a lot of parents coming in to the library looking for this book because their kids are reading it, and then the adults read it because they want to be in on this conversation, which is a really, really important conversation. Do we want to talk a little bit about the plot, roughly, of this book?
Yeah, so just without giving too much away, just in case there are folks who may not have read it, but as we talk about the conversation piece of it, and parents and teens alike coming into the library to check materials out, I know they did that with The Fault in Our Stars, a novel by John Green. Conversations that are a little hard to have with your teenager, and perhaps for the teen, having those conversations with their parent or their guardian at home, dealing with things such as sex and drugs and bullying.
That's a huge one.
Identity issues. So certainly I think YA books that have been turned into film create a platform for this conversation to take place. A lot of times
once it gets made into a movie, it reaches a much wider audience. Because, although there are the parents that come in to read this book with their kids, I don't think all parents are ready to sit down and commit to reading this whole novel. So once it becomes a movie, at that point, you can commit 2 hours to sit down and watch it with your family, and then it really becomes, it widens the conversations that are had about it.
Right, for the parents, because as librarians, we do encourage kids to read the books.
Of course.
And you should.
And they really are. So this book, for the first year or more than year since it was published, you can find this book in a library because it was constantly checked out. There were humongous hold lists for this book, which we don't really find in the young adult world. In the world of adult fiction, there's bestsellers that you have to, wait on these long wait lists for. And this one it's pretty uncommon that this phenomenon happens with this book. So it's just a huge runaway hit.
Yeah. So I just want to touch a little bit on, I know we're talking about books that have been adapted into film, but there are those books that have been adapted on screen into a series. And we'll get a little bit more into that in our second segment, but one of the things, I don't think we have it with us today, but 13 Reasons Why was adapted and Netflix was able to produce that. And what made me think about that was just a couple days ago, I was talking to a parent who said that she wanted her daughter to see it, but they had to read the book first. And after reading the book, then they can they can take the time to actually watch each episode and have a discussion.
Yeah.
For those of you who may not be aware, 13 Reasons Why addresses the topic of suicide. And a lot of times, I think topics that we are afraid to talk about with our kids, some things we may look at as taboo.
Right.
Again, having them in literary form, but then on screen really not forces a conversation, but like I said before, creates a platform to have those conversations.
And it creates a sort of safe space, I think, for kids to have these conversations with their parents and with adults in their lives, because it's sort of, librarian sanctioned,
Yeah.
You're getting this book from the library, so it must be great.
Yeah. So over the last year or so, we've been witnessing things like, social justice, LGBTQ issues, religious and gender identities. Are there any books that we could reference or maybe look to that cover those topics?
Yeah. There's 2. Yeah, there's that one and this one.
Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda.
This one's actually my favorite book to film adaptation of the last year. There was about 6, at least 6 in the last year. So I think this one was the most successful. Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda. It's a mouthful. So when they made the movie, they changed it to Love Simon.
Love Simon.
2 words.
Yeah.
Much easier to say. So this book is about a teenage boy who is not so openly gay, and he strikes up an email correspondence with an anonymous boy at his school. So it's a very sort of humorous and poignant love story, a budding love story. But then one of their emails gets put into the wrong hands, and he ends up being blackmailed by a classmate. So he has to juggle, all these things like. Will he be able to come out on his own terms, or will he be forcibly pushed out, as well as all his friendships and everything he has going on at school? And it really drives home the idea that teenagers' lives are so complicated. I think
complicated and complex.
We fail to appreciate this sometimes. So what's great about this is basically an LGBTQ love story on the big screen. And that's something we weren't seeing 10 years ago.
Right.
When we were seeing The Fault in Our Stars and Twilight, which were these, super wide and straight-laced kind of movies. Maybe not so straight-laced, but but we're getting different kinds of stories.
One of the let's see. We mentioned The Fault in Our Stars. I think that is a staple.
Yeah, totally. It's a milestone.
But there's also another book that was published, If I Stay, that has kind of a similar
similar
storyline to it, where I don't
Did you
think.
see this one?
That one I didn't see,
Yeah,
actually.
I didn't see this one.
But Fault in Our Stars is the story of two teens who fall in love, who are both cancer patients, and they go through the motions of a relationship. You know, they're terminally ill, so they want to experience just about everything. So that opens up a conversation, you know, with parents and their teen about cancer, about being sick, and relationships and how to navigate those things. And I often will suggest something to parents and teens, you know, without focusing on the actual cancer piece of it. But if you're just going through something and you want to explore, you know, relationships, I'll recommend something like that. But there's also The Miseducation of Cameron Post.
So this one is a little bit, how shall I say, this one is not like the others, because all the rest of these were pretty much, you know, best-selling books before they became like really big hit movies in the YA world. This one is a little bit of an under-the-radar book. It's also an LGBTQ story about a girl in Montana, I believe, and she gets caught with her girlfriend, and her family's very conservative, so they sent her to one of these like gay conversion camps. So this book is actually very literary in the way it's written, so in that sense I think it would really appeal to adults. It's not necessarily a fast-paced read like a lot of these are. And when the movie was made, it was made as an independent film. So it didn't really release, it didn't get the big release that a lot of these other ones did. And I've been struggling to figure out where I can find it to watch it. And here's a plug for the library. You can actually watch it through a streaming service called Canopy that we have available in Maplewood. So you sign up with your library card, and there's all these free movies that you can watch on there, including this one, which is a little bit more like art house fare compared to the rest of these.
Right. So you mentioned mainstream and then independent films. So we want to be clear in saying that not all films are blockbuster hits, but again, a lot of times independent filmmakers take them and do have adaptations with them. So we have a whole lot more to talk about, and I think, Larry, did you have any questions you wanted to ask us, or anything that you...
Well, I'm just kind of intrigued at what you're talking about. These are all young adult books that you're talking about, but they, you know, they seem to hit the, you know, the range of problems that anybody, or the range of emotions, the range of ideas, you know, the range of topics. It's kind of interesting. And when you were talking earlier about teen films, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was something like Gidget, you know, which was just one of those, you know, well, you're not old enough to remember, obviously, but it was just like, you know, teenagers on the beach kind of thing. You know, you know, I mean, certainly, I guess, fluff. But we're going to have to take a break.
Okay.
So we're going to take a break. We'll be back in about a minute, and we'll continue the conversation with Keisha and Jenny. So don't go away.
It's an onion.
Welcome back. This is Larry Petraccaro with Books in Action, and I have with me Jenny Zabrizer and Keisha Miller from the Maplewood and the South Orange Public Libraries, respectively. And we've been talking about young adult fiction and how it gets translated into film. So one of the things that I've always said, you know, perhaps more often than I should, is that the book always seems better than the movie. You should always, I don't know if that's always the case, but maybe it should be. But what do you think about that? Is the book, is the book able to do things perhaps that the movie can't? Or is it right to say the book is always better? Or is it more accurate to say the book is always different? Or maybe the book is always the same, I don't know.
I'm a very visual person. And so I will read the book and imagine myself as one of the characters being placed in that book. But then to actually see it on screen, it's like I'm sitting on the edge of my chair and I'm like, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
Or that character didn't look that way to me.
Yeah.
But our job as librarians is to certainly promote literacy.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been able to do in South Orange is take the teen book group that I have. We're called the Spine Crackers. The Spine Crackers. Take that book group and take the readers and show a film. Sometimes I've shown parts of film so that we can actually do a compare contrast. You know, is this what happened in the book versus what's on screen? So I don't know if the argument upholds whether or not the book is better than the movie. I think again, we spoke about conversation, you know, the content that's in some of these books and how it creates platforms to have conversations. I think when we look at books and the film adaptations, that also creates a different kind of platform to have different conversations.
Right. I think everyone is going to have their own opinion. I think a lot of people who read the book and love the book first do tend to fall into the camp of the book is always going to be better than the film. I actually was talking with a teenager last week, and we were talking about the Divergent series, which she says is her favorite book series. So I was asking her if she's seen the movies, and she tells me, I did, and I wish I hadn't. So I was like, why ever not? And it was basically for the reason you said, because when you love a book or a book series, you develop a connection to the characters as you read them and as you picture them in your imagination. And I think a lot of that tends to get lost when they do make it into a movie, although it does reach a wider audience who maybe hasn't read the book. You lose, I think, a lot of maybe the introspection that you find in a lot of these books. Taking a look at all of these, there's so much on the page, you know, there's so much textual stuff going on where we're in the reader's head that you really can't translate into a movie, especially with a lot of this realistic fiction. I think movies thrive on plot, you know, so I think it's difficult to capture all the nuances and all that magic.
Well, can I ask a question? What you talked about, you got so immersed in a character, or you thought you developed a whole personality, I suppose, when you read it. Does some of the imagination that you, I presume, have to display or to take advantage of as you read a book in terms of visualizing things that's written on the page, is that lost in a movie? Do you get the same number of options in a movie, perhaps, that you would get in a book? You know, I mean, if they don't describe if they don't describe a person too completely, you know, you might think he has blonde hair, or black hair, or red hair. But if he's on the screen, he's got either blonde hair, or black hair, or red hair, or she does. I'm sorry, I better be careful. What do you think about the role of imagination in reading and the role of imagination in a movie?
I think that has a lot to do with, I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, nor am I an author, but I think that has a lot to do with the person who's writing the screenplay. They should reach out to the author to incorporate the author into the film. It only makes sense.
Yeah, and what's wild to me is a lot of the times the author doesn't really have a writing role in the making of these movies. I know it seems pretty wild to me. It seems like a no-brainer, like bring the author on to help you write your screenplay. But I feel like oftentimes authors are not consulted, so it's really the filmmaker's imagination or whoever casts the movie.
Yeah, like I'm wondering, have they read the book?
You do have to wonder sometimes, or the actors for that matter, the actors that are playing these roles. You would think they would have read the book, but I don't know if that's always the case.
Well, is there a book that you've seen, or a book you've seen? No, you see a lot of books. Is there a book that's been turned into a movie where you've both read the book and seen the movie, and have there been elements in either the movie or the book that you found, discordant or disappointing when you think back about what you read and what you saw?
For me, it was The Fault in Our Stars. I felt that the movie was depicted just as the book.
You thought they did a good job.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job in
Being
that.
true.
What I would like to see, though, are some books that, some films that were adapted from books, perhaps to be, on the award list, the Oscars, you're being recognized in that form, because
We
a
haven't
lot of
seen
these
much
books
of that.
are award-winning books.
They are.
So
yeah.
it says something about them being good for literature purposes, and to be adapted into, on screen, it says a lot. So
Yeah.
I don't know what we can do as librarians to push
So-
that initiative.
I have high hopes for one of these. They just announced a few weeks ago that one of my favorite books is going to be adapted into a movie, Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. And with this one, actually, they are having the author write the screenplay for the movie, which I'm very excited about. This is an award-winning book. And the thing is that it features a plus-size heroine in this love story. It's a Korean-American boy and this plus-size girl, Eleanor, and the author herself, I think she sort of based the main character on herself. And that's not something we see a ton of in movies either, where we see models pretty much acting in these kinds of things. So I hope that they really get this right with the casting, and that they don't cast a girl who, Hollywood think passes for plus-sized. So I really am expecting, have high expectations that they will do justice to this book. And I do hope that it will get that sort of literary recognition in a movie sense that this book has gotten, because this book made me feel things. It was one of the first books I read as an adult, young adult books that I read as an adult, that really, it was so beautifully written. It reminded me of what it feels like to fall in love for the first time. It was just that effective and I'm a hard nut to crack.
So I guess for you, the big disappointment would be if the casting doesn't live up to the images and the imagination that you
I
had.
think that's part of it. Yeah, that's step one. If you mess that up, then what else are you going to mess up?
Right.
And from there,
That's a
you
question.
hope that the actors are good and the direction is good. And I think the screenplay will be good because it'll be adapted by the person who wrote it. So actually with we don't have it here. The Sun is Also a Star is a movie that just came out recently, based on a book. So I had this issue with those actors because if you look this movie up, you'll see that the actors they cast, they don't look like high schoolers. They look like 20-somethings. They look very glamorous. They have this amazing bone structure. It's crazy. And I was talking about it with a teen who loves this book, and I asked her if that was an issue for her, that these actors don't really look like they're in high school. And I was actually interested in her response. She said that wasn't an issue for her at all, because I think it's sort of aspirational. She told me that this is how she pictures
Herself.
these teens and herself, and a male love interest, unlike the boys she actually sees in high school. She pictures them looking the way these actors do.
Interesting. I mean, I guess if we took ourselves back to our teenage years, there are so many things that we would do to play up certain features.
Absolutely.
And as I said, me being a visual person, I guess, if you're imagining this character, you would do certain things to kind of play up, yourself on screen. And I guess if you're watching the movie, a lot of times you're like, oh, I could dress this way or behave this way or do this or do that.
It's like the ideal version of yourself, your best self.
Well, when you mentioned the spine crackers, you mentioned that you've also talked about movies.
Yes. A lot of times,
For both of you, has there been any particular movies that kids have really liked? And was there anything about it why they liked it?
I mean, it's not here, but as we're talking, I was thinking about graphic novels.
Okay.
And a lot of these superhero books that have been turned into film, and one of which is Black Panther. I mean, that just took the entire film industry by storm, and we couldn't keep the books on the shelves at all. People saw the film, and it was just one of these movements that just came along that brought us as a people together. And recognizing Black culture and honoring it, and even this past February they brought it back to the theater to be seen again. And again, that caused a resurgence of the books. Like, do you have Black Panther? Do you have Black Panther? And they wanted to read it. And, you know, again, you're talking about characters and identifying with characters. You know, a lot of times people, I know there's libraries that have done programs where you're dressing up as the characters in a book. You know, you dress up as characters in films, you'll dress up as characters in books. So that happened. That's one of the things that I saw with Black Panther. But I think we do see it, as we talk about young adult novels, we see it right across. I mean, we were focusing more on those things that have been recently published in the last 10 years or so. But I mentioned before about, you know, perhaps, maybe you and I were talking, perhaps about taking a book, taking a film that has been made already, but maybe writing a book about it. I don't know if anybody thinks about that. Like, I was thinking about E.T., like way back when.
Bring it back.
And, you know, I stand corrected. I misread that as it being written by someone, but it was a screenplay. But that's a book that I think is just timeless. A movie, see? A movie that is just timeless, that I think would create a very good book.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know.
Well, you both said something that, okay, we only have about a minute left, but I'll have to ask. You mentioned something about when you talked to this one of the girls at the library. She was looking at the idealization of herself and others around her with respect to the characters, and you talked about Black Panther, which to some extent is, which I've seen as a good movie, but it's also as a graphic novel. That kind of Black Panther superhero universe tends to be somewhat on the fantastical side. Is there a propensity for teens to really embrace the fantasy aspect of it, and any idea why?
Yeah.
And you have 1 minute.
Yeah. I mean, fantasy is so popular. Fantasy books, fantasy movies in libraries with teens. I think part of it for them is a bit of escapism, because you know, you have so many issues. Like, your life is so complicated when you're a teenager, and you want something more. You want these worlds and your imagination.
What's the sci-fi book that came out just last summer? The movie. That's putting everybody on the spot.
Was it one of the Star Wars ones?
Oh gosh, it'll come to me.
But it's not based on a book.
It is.
Oh, it is based on a
book.
book.
What? Which one was it?
Yeah.
We can't remember.
I can't remember. Oh, goodness. That happens.
Yeah, we've had that Star Wars universe. That's more myth than anything else in a way, and I guess myths tie us together as a people. I had a couple of other questions, but we have like 0 time, so we're going to have to.
It's an ongoing conversation.
I think you brought up some really interesting points that which hope maybe we'll have a chance to continue. So thank you for joining us on Books in Action. This is Larry Petraccaro, Keisha Miller, and Jenny Zabrizer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you for coming.